Let's see, Jay Hansen here. I am functioning as the chair for this Construction Industry Energy Board meeting of October 17th, 2023. And I'm going to call this meeting to order at 9:31 by my time, which is the correct time. Debbie, could you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chairing virtually this morning from the Mechanical Board, Jay Hansen.
Present virtually.
Representing the Electrical and Elevator Board, our Vice Chair, Thomas Kyle, who is in the room.
Present.
Thank you, Tom. And representing the Building Code Structures Board, virtually, Gary Heikkinen.
I'm here.
Thank you. Representing the Electrical and Elevator Board, Ryan Richards.
Right here.
Thank you, Ryan. And everyone else is going to be virtually as well. Blake Schlide, representing the State Department of Energy.
Here.
Thank you, Blake. Representing the Mechanical Board, Walter Cottle.
Here.
Representing the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board, John Chmelir.
Here.
Thank you, John. And our newest member representing the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board, Matthew Lutter.
Here.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Debbie. Chair Hansen rules that the amended agenda for item, let's see, that would be 7B, and our order of business is approved. Let's see, do any members of this board have any changes to the draft meetings or minutes that were sent out very recently? Anyone have anything to add to the minutes of our last meeting? Hearing none, I'm going to rule the draft meeting minutes of June 13th, 2023 final. So we have a meeting coming up scheduled for the 6th of February in 2024. And so that will be, I believe, also on a Tuesday and at our regularly appointed time of 9:30. And so now I'm going to turn the mic. I'm going to hand the mic to Matthew Lutter. I would like to introduce him as our newest member. He's from the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board. He was just voted in by his peers about 15 minutes ago, and he's here to represent them on our board. So Matthew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Jay. My name is Matt Lutter, and I live and work in Eugene, Oregon. I am a utility representative for the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board. I've worked 14 years at Eugene Water and Electric Board, a public utility serving Eugene and the Mackenzie River community. In my role at the utility, I help our customers save energy in their homes and businesses. I also help manage a program to encourage efficient new construction homes and businesses, which has given me insight into energy codes in Oregon. I look forward to using my utility experience and engineering skill set and energy knowledge to help the Building Codes Division advance codes in Oregon. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Welcome aboard. Thank you, Matthew. We'll move on to Pierre. Do we have any to address the general public comment item or items? Are there any public comments?
Thank you, Chair Hansen.
Today, Pierre.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, members of the board. My name is Pierre Sabat, Policy Analyst with the Division. We haven't received any requests for public comment to the board today. I'll take a moment just in case there's anyone in the room or online that would like to provide any general public comment to the board. Seeing and hearing none, back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Mark, it's your turn. Mark Heizer will give us a program update.
Thank you, Chair.
What's been happening with the program, Mark?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. For the record, Mark Heizer with the division. I want to give some general notes on program updates. First is a general note. I know that most of you have been on other boards and have been introduced to Richard Donovan, our new senior policy analyst, who will be overseeing all of the policy analysts that, come to your boards, whether it's electrical, mechanical, plumbing. And so we're welcoming him aboard. One item, next item is that the Oregon team working with the ASHRAE organization and ICC and other states were able to get some national funding for training for energy codes. We're looking forward to that moving forward. I believe Pacific Northwest National Laboratory will be doing some parallel, but this is to try and get better training for building officials on code training. An update on the residential code. University of Oregon finished their study on the 2023 residential code energy provisions, and based on their work, the Executive Order 2017 items required through the year 2023 have been completed. I believe there's one last item for 2024. We have sent our federal certification letter to U.S. Department of Energy, noting that we are equivalent or better than the current required National Model Code, the 2021 IECC residential provisions. Hopefully they'll get the maps updated. We're working on other pieces to send to them to get our state information updated. Coming later, probably on the legislative report, is that the 2024 report to the governor's office, required under Executive Order 2004, has been posted. You can find a link to it on the division's energy program. Has a link to the Executive Order webpage. Really like to give a shout out to the division staff that helped put the report together, Kelly Thomas, Laura Burns, and other staff. It's a really good report. Due to some legislation that'll be mentioned later, we have a requirement to present a version, an updated version of this report to the legislature in December. We're continuing to be on track to meet the 2030 year energy code targets. The work today we'll be having later for adoption of the next version of 90.1. Will continue us on our path for the commercial energy code. At the last residential board, we also presented to the RMSB information on home size. That's been a consideration on their agenda for looking whether or not we should have a method to adjust and provide a scale for how much energy efficiency should be applied to dwelling units based on their size. Looking at what's been done in Washington, where they have sort of a three-step for less is required for homes under 1,500 square feet. Then there's a middle range for the basic code. And then for homes over 5,000 square feet, they require additional input. Again, keeping in mind that, we have looking at how to continue to maintain affordable housing for low and middle income families. And that's it for the energy program update. Thank you. Any questions?
Excellent. No questions? I have a comment. It's great to hear that the University of Oregon was contributing to this program. Makes me proud, makes my heart swell with pride. Ooh, go Ducks. Okay. If there are no other comments, I would like to move on to Andy Bolton to give us a bit of a presentation on legislative update, and the Senior Policy Advisor, Andy Bolton, extraordinaire.
Good morning, Chair Hansen, members of the board. I am Andy Bolton, Senior Policy Advisor Extraordinaire for the division. I'm here this morning to give you a brief update on the legislation that came out of this year's legislative session that impacts the division. There is a full summary in the board packet that goes into depth on the bills that impact the division and the division's plan for implementing those requirements. There's really only one bill this session that had a significant intersection with this board's area of oversight. So I'm going to focus on that one for this update, but you can get more detail in the full summary. And if you'd like even more detail than that, you can find it on the Oregon Legislative Information System website, also known as OEESC. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them here, but if it's detail or text specific, I may have to take the question away with me and get back to you, as I think at this point, almost everyone on the board has heard once before. The one bill that I mentioned is House Bill 3409. It's the Climate and Greenhouse Gas Emissions Bill, and it is a large bill with a lot going on. It actually combined 15 different bills into one bill. So there's a lot there, and I'm just going to go through the quick hits in terms of what impacts the division specifically. The bill adds consideration of greenhouse gas emissions to the list of priorities the division must consider when executing agency actions. The division is directed to consult with the Environmental Justice Council when evaluating priorities that the division sets and actions the division takes to adapt to and mitigate the impacts of climate change. The division is currently exploring the best way to implement this consultation, but it will likely involve a regular check-in with the council on pending agency action in that area. The bill places into statute the reporting requirements that had previously existed in Executive Order 2004. The division will continue to fulfill these requirements as it has since the EO was put in place in 2020. The division is directed to study the use of lower carbon building materials in the building code, and to this end, the legislature funded 2 additional positions with the division. The division also anticipates contracting with a third party to assist with the study. The bill directs the division to adopt the REACH codes through a rulemaking process, and there will be an item later on in the agenda where you'll be looking at the division's proposed rulemaking process for adopting the commercial and residential REACH codes. The Oregon Department of Energy was directed to develop energy performance standards for covered commercial buildings, and the division will consult with the Department of Energy on these standards. That's the quick hits of House Bill 3409. Are there any questions?
I see a hand up.
Oh.
Looks like Gary. Is your hand up, Gary?
My hand is up. Thank you.
Gary's hand is up.
Yeah, quick question, and you may not have the answer, but I'm going to answer it anyway. How will the state, whether it be the division or DEQ or whatever, track actual greenhouse gas emissions reductions from these various programs? One in particular that is significant is the installation of heat pumps and accelerating the installation of heat pumps. Very good technology. But how will the state track the actual impact to greenhouse gas emissions reductions from these programs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Member Heikkinen. I do not have an answer to that question in front of me. I can check around and try to get back to you, but I do not have a good answer for you right now.
Nobody does.
And if I may just follow on a little bit.
Yep.
So, okay. I guess I'm very interested in the answer to that, so I would appreciate the follow-up on that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Through the chair, this is Tom Kyle. You have there's a certification program for electricians for installing EVs. And the reporting says after 500, we have to report up to 500. What happens after the 500? Do we keep reporting, or is that
The 500 in that, this is Bill 582, I believe, and it's 582, SB 582, and the bill has certain requirements around a new training program for electricians to be certified in installing EV charging infrastructure, and there's some specific triggers around what is required on certain projects. I believe that it's state-run or state construction project, and that triggers a certain percentage of the electricians have to be certified with that new education program after there are 500 certified in the state. And so that would be sort of a one-time trigger that once it's hit, those additional requirements would be in place, but it wouldn't be, there's no requirements in the bill to continue tracking and continue reporting on how many are certified after that point.
Okay, thank you. And I guess state funding would be almost anything. If there's any energy credits, that's all through the state also, isn't it?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, thank you.
John Chmelir, through the chair.
Hi, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, has there been any studies on if over the next 10 years the projected dramatic change to heat pumps from gas heat and the addition of all the charging stations and anticipated use of the charging stations distributed around the state, perhaps, proportionally to population, I guess. Has there been any studies as to where the power is going to come from and how it's going to get transported to all these different places, and whether our current infrastructure is adequate to meet those needs? And if not, why not?
Those types of studies would be kind of outside the scope of the division. We haven't done them. I'm not sure if they've been done by a different agency.
I'd still like the answer at some point, and I think it'd be useful for us who are voting on these kinds of changes to know what the back end of the planning is. I mean, it accommodates rhetoric and general anticipatory need and all this other stuff, but are we prepared to actually deal with the actual result of what happens? So I think the division ought to at least know that, since and certainly the Energy Board should know that if we're voting for things that are going to add requirements for electricity generation and distribution, we ought to know that it's going to be available, or we're not being responsible. Thank you.
Well, John, I'm not sure, and Andy, you can correct me in this regard. This is just part of the legislation.
Yes.
Not what we're voting on.
Correct.
And Blake, you were on the task force, weren't you?
I was not on the task force.
You were not on the task force? I thought you were on the task force. So am I the only one here that was on the task force? I think I'm the only one here that was on the task force. John, I can tell you that task force that recommended a lot of this legislation that has become this bill was, at best, it was stacked. And we asked there were a few of us on the task force that asked the same questions. Before we demand this, can we look at what the impact is going to be on our infrastructure? Can we deliver the increased load that the state will require? And we were told that our infrastructure is good. Our infrastructure is fine. And we know it's not. But that's what the task force wished to happen. It was a very, I do not recommend to anybody to join one of these task force where you, as a group, develop concepts for legislation. It was painful, very, very painful, very time consuming, and very unproductive. And here we are. It's our political model.
Well, John Chmelir again. I'm an engineer, and good and fine I can't find them anywhere in any of the standards or textbooks about engineering. I generally deal in facts, and I think it's incumbent on the state to develop those facts. And I'd like to go on record that the state ought to develop those facts. Otherwise, it's just virtue signaling as much of what we see today. And I just don't think it's right. So I'd like at the next meeting, I mean, if it's important for the board to know what this legislation is, and if there's some reason for us to know this legislation, then there ought to be reason for us to know engineering fact. And I'd like the board to come up with some answers to these kinds of questions. I think it's just irresponsible to not. Thank you.
So, Andy, is it appropriate, or anyone here on staff, is it appropriate for this board to shoot some questions back to the legislature and say, give us answers to these things so that we can act on them? Is that appropriate? Anyone?
I'm not sure what the path would be in order to deliver the question to the legislature. I can find out, and we can take those questions to wherever we find out we can take them. I can't guarantee a response.
Yeah, because John, I don't believe we can develop answers to what they want us to do, what they want, what their goals are for this legislation. Their goals for this legislation is votes. That's what the goal for this legislation is votes.
Well, I'm not going to presuppose anything here, but the division, building codes division, I'm a builder too, holds me to very specific rules. And I'm an engineer capable of coming up with very specific answers. So I expect the division to come up with some very specific answers to my question. I mean, maybe that's seemingly outside the scope, but that seems like a real convenient answer at this point. You know, perhaps it's the only answer you have at this point, but at some point there's got to be answers. And I think the division ought to, as a division, representing our board to the legislature, ought to ask the questions that the board members are asking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so do you know what John would like to have asked? Andy?
I believe he would like to have asked whether or not there are studies on availability of power for heat pumps and EV charging infrastructure was the first question we got through, and whether or not that was considered during the course of the legislation. Am I getting that right, John?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you it was considered, but not.
Through the chair, I guess I have a comment on that. As an electrical contractor, I've done hundreds of projects and some pretty good size infrastructure that involved a lot of power coming in. And the worst case we've had is the power company would say, it'll take 6 months to get a transformer, but we can put something temporary in. If we build it, they've supplied power to it. And so I'm not that concerned about it. It's beyond our scope. It's up to the power companies and the distribution to make that happen, and I'm sure they're on top of that. And I'm sure the EWEB is watching that also. It's if we put the project in, somebody will bring power to it. That's been my experience.
Has been mine also. Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Blake, your hand's up.
Thanks, Chair Hansen. Yeah, through the chair, I wonder if there's also an opportunity to reach out to our colleagues over at the Oregon Public Utility Commission. I know that there's a lot of work that's done with electricity planning and integrated resource plans And I'm sure that, and I'm not directly involved with any of this work, but I know they're looking pretty hard at what our future electrical infrastructure looks like, and each utilities integrated resource plan considers all these different options and different scenarios of future electrification and where the extra load is going to be in the future. So I think that some of these answers are probably available with the PUC and with our electric utilities. And I wonder if that's an opportunity to reach out and get some information from them.
It's an excellent thought, Blake. Okay, Andy?
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on. Communications. Pierre Sabah, do you have any communications for our board?
Thank you, Chair Hansen, members of the board. My name is Pierre Sabah, Policy Analyst with the Division. This is just an informal kind of thing for the board. The division is requesting that the board review the division's proposed process and timeline for developing and adopting the 2023 Oregon Residential REACH Code. We previously discussed this timeline with the residential board a couple weeks ago. The 2023 Oregon Residential REACH Code is an optional set of standards designed to increase energy efficiency. All municipalities must accept the REACH Code, and it provides an additional efficiency compliance path. The REACH Code must be technically feasible and must be more efficient than the building code. The division's goal here is to have the 2023 Oregon Residential REACH Code in place by July 1, 2024. The division's timeline for this is in your board packet today. If you have any questions, please feel free, and Mark is here as well. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Pierre. We have no unfinished business in front of us, but we do have some new business that we will move on to. Let's see. Pierre, will you introduce this item that we have to vote on, and then Mark can discuss the item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen. Once again, for the record, Pierre Sabah, Policy Analyst of the Division. The Division is requesting the Board's review and approval of the Division's proposed REACH Code adoption process and rulemaking timeline. As Andy had mentioned during his legislative update, during this last legislative session in 2023, the legislator passed House Bill 3409, which includes a requirement that the REACH Code be adopted by rule with the approval of the appropriate advisory boards. Previously, for REACH codes, the Division had worked with stakeholders and the boards to adopt those. So now these proposed rules and adoption process changes are intended to create a predictable process by which the Division, with board approval, can adopt future versions of the REACH Code. We recently took this to the residential board as well, who approved the process. This rulemaking proposal for adopting the REACH Code includes a process that will slightly differ from the base code adoption process that's normally outlined under OAR 918-008-0020. The full language of this proposed rule is going to be the amended OAR 918-465-0040. And my apologies to the board, this was meant to be in your board packet today, but I'm not seeing it. So Andy is working with Debbie to show you this rule, making language prior to today's motion and vote. So this agenda item will require a motion, examples of which are included in your board packet. I can take any questions right now while Andy and Debbie work on getting that document to the board. Once again, my apologies. This should have been in your board packet so you guys could have seen the rule language, but we are working on that actively. Thank you.
Are these the changes you're talking about, Pierre? Because I'm looking at them.
For the record, Pierre Sabah.
I see it in the board packet.
You see the rule language for 918-465-0040? Because that's not in my board packet.
I just see a board memo.
Yeah, my apologies, Chair Hansen. The rule language for the rule that we are trying to change that will create the rule for the REACH Code adoption process should be in your board packet, but we are working to get that to the board right now. So I can answer any questions on the process and the timeline for adopting this rule if the board has any questions while we wait on that. My apologies.
I think it's here. So are we going to wait on Debbie to email each of us individually something? Is that what we're doing?
Chair Hansen, Pierre, it's Bob for the record. Mark is going to just share screen and display the rule language for the board momentarily. For Debbie.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Heizer? This is Debbie. Did you get it? I'm on Wi-Fi here, so I can't display on my screen. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. For the record, Pierre Sabah. Yeah, this is the proposed rule language for the REACH code adoption process rule. So if the board wants to take a few minutes to review this language, the division recommends approval of the rule. We will need a motion and a vote. So whenever the board is comfortable with reviewing this and then taking a vote. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And if at any point you'd like for me to scroll further down in the document, I showed the strikeout language, and these are the new rules through Part 3 showing currently.
This is John Chmelir. So I'm sitting in my car on a job site, and I can't see anything. I'm on the phone. So can somebody send me an email or something?
John, for the record, Pierre Sabah. Yes, Debbie's going to send you an email with the rule language right now.
Thank you.
I'm ready to scroll to the next screen. Does anybody need any more time? Just raise your hand if you need more time. It's fine.
John, Debbie just sent you an email.
Mr. Chair, John Chmelir will obviously need more time. I just sent him the document.
Okay. Debbie, I might ask that you email that to everybody. If you're going to be sending it to John, if you could just put the whole team on there.
Yes, sir.
This is John Chmelir. I've had a chance to read it. Thank you.
Seems pretty reasonable to me across the board. Sure.
So I'll turn the meeting back over to the division. Thank you, Mark Heizer with division. Thank you.
For the record, Pierre Sabah with the division. Once the board is ready, we will entertain a motion and vote. Thank you, Chair Hansen.
You got a chance to review that, John?
Yes, Mr. Chair, he has.
He had, okay. All right. Would anyone like to make a motion?
To the chair, I'll make the motion to approve the division's proposed REACH codes adoption process and proposed timeline. It's Thomas Kyle.
Thomas, thank you. Do we have a second?
Walt Cottle, I will second the motion.
All those in favor?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah?
We
Oh, that's
do
right.
need
You have to
do
call roll.
call.
Yeah, that's right.
John Chmelir,
Yes.
Matthew Lutter, Lutter.
Yes.
Excuse me. Walt Cottle.
Present?
This is voting, Walt. It's yay or nay?
Yes. Oh, yay. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Blake Schlide,
Yes.
Gary Heikkinen,
Yes.
Ryan Richards,
Aye. Yes.
Vice Chair Thomas Kyle,
Aye.
and Chair Jay Hansen.
Virtually voting aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
All right. So we have an amended agenda, and that includes the next item. Pierre, can you introduce this item to us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Pierre Spa, Policy Analyst with the Division. I also wanted to thank the board for their patience with the last agenda item. Appreciate it. Moving forward, the division is requesting the board review and approve the 2024 Oregon Energy Efficiency Specialty Code and recommend the code to the administrator to proceed with rulemaking. Some background, we've talked about this with the at these meetings before, but OAR 918-008-0200 was adopted and became effective on Jan 1, 2023. The purpose of this rule was to have a predictable and consistent OEESC adoption process to meet the energy efficiency goals of the state based on a thoroughly vetted, federal recognized national model energy standard. This code is based on the latest ASHRAE 90.1 standard with necessary Oregon amendments. At the board meeting we had on March 14th, 2023, the division gave the board an informal notice regarding the new latest ASHRAE 90.1 publication. At the board meeting on June 13th, 2023, the division gave the board an official notice regarding the publication, which satisfied the new adoption process rule. The division is requesting board review and approval of this proposed 2024 OEESC, which is based on the ASHRAE publication with necessary Oregon amendments. A copy of this draft is in today's board packet with the adjusted amendment that were the adjustments to the EC table and R01 credit. A public hearing will take place for this proposed 2024 OEESC in November. The anticipated adoptive date is January 1, 2024, with a 6-month phase-in period ending June 30th, 2024. This agenda item will require a motion, examples of which are in your board packet. Approval must be with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources. Mark is here virtually. He has some comments to add, and he will also take any technical questions on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mark, you want to go through this thing briefly? You want to give us the 30,000 foot level, maybe even the 15,000 foot level, and your comments also?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen and the board. Once again, for the record, Mark Heizer with the division. In your package, of course, you will find really a summary of major changes that are in the standard 90.1 2022, as well as a second heading area of modifications that are done each year to the Oregon Energy Efficiency Specialty Code document. That document is also included, and it shows the updated version for adoption this year. That is intended to really provide that link between standard 90.1 to make the administrative provisions and limited local changes that are necessary to align with, of course, other boards and pieces. So if you'd like, I can go through the significant changes document saying really one of the, if you'd like to hear that, I'll begin with chapter 11 or section 11, if you'd like.
I would.
Okay, so the first item is a brand new section number 11, additional efficiency requirements. This is one of the biggest changes for 90.1 for 2022. The same application happened in the International Energy Conservation Code commercially. This sort of reflects and follows with something that Oregon sort of created, which is additional measures or optional paths for getting additional efficiency. What they have done is created for, and I may have some documents I want to share with you, is a minimum number of additional credits. One thing we will provide links for later, and I'd like to share that right now, is, let's see here. There are some documents that are one document I need to bring up that the additional credits were really developed by Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in consultation with the 90.1 committee and also with the IECC committee. If I can bring this up, I want to share, just share screen. And this is, forgive me. They have some articles that were published in ASHRAE 90.1 that actually go over all of the changes. 90.1 is going to make these available such that we can share them with you. There is a larger document that we can provide a link to that really goes into detail. It's sort of a user's guide for the standards. But what it entails is a group of energy efficiency credits for the different climate zones. And if you'll forgive me here, once again, wanted to have this up and available. So it sets for our climate zones 4C and 5B for 8 different building types, whether you're multifamily, healthcare, hotel, motel, office, restaurant, retail, education, warehouse, and then sort of a catch-all, all others. It sets a minimum number of points required. Each 10 points is worth approximately a 10% or 1% efficiency improvement. So it starts with, let's say, a multifamily building, climate zone 5B, 50 credits, and we'll call them, it's very difficult to settle on a name for it, but 50 credits are required. That is equivalent to a 5% efficiency increase. And then to get those credits, they have developed tables. This is the table for office buildings. So for each climate zone, they have different categories of additional credits. One, it'll start with an E for envelope, H for HVAC, W for water heating, P for power, L for lighting. And each one is assigned a number of credits. As part of this, some of these get multiplied additionally, such as I believe it's one of the solar and a few others credits have addition. You can it's not just, you might not just get 4 points, but you might be able to get as many as 8 or 12 points for some of these. One item we wanted to point out from this is that the credits that are available, if you'll see the green lines on the screen here, those represent the number of credits available for our climate zones 4C and 5B. That really, for the office building, if you need 50 credits, they're potentially up to 300 or 280, it appears, different possible combinations to meet this additional credit path. So there's a lot of flexibility available. It's a little tougher for medical, but for a warehouse, a hotel, multifamily, there's many different ways to get there. So what will happen is you will find your design team will decide, well, what's most cost effective, what's easiest for you to do to get to those credits. Moving back, and again,
you need those credits before you can proceed. You have to show that you have those credits before you can even apply for a permit and present a report showing all your path for those credits.
Right. And ComCheck is being that they have a simpler version in the current version of ComCheck for the IECC. It does a lot of the calculation for you within the program. So for some of these that may be based on your square footage or other applications, it's made fairly simple. This is one thing where we are following very closely on the promised delivery date for ComCheck, because this will be important for us to have that working before we begin the program. Supposed to have it up and working by the end of this year, so it'll be available in January. I have some suspicion that it may be as late as March, so the division will be looking at actual application date depending on, final rule, depending on that availability. So that is the big change. We'll have discuss a little bit more later in the adjustments, but back to the summary. That
Mark,
was.
Would you email that form that you were just showing us to the board, please?
Yes, we will.
Is that possible?
The the Word document and that was shown earlier that had the additional pieces there. Yes, yeah. We can get that sent out. And one item we're going to be able to hopefully have links to once ASHRAE gives us permission to give the ASHRAE articles, which we can actually post it online here. They have promised that what normally would require a subscription, they will make it publicly available for these 90.1 code changes.
Okay, the $64,000 question. Can you sell credits? If you earned credits. If I happen to design my building into my warehouse and I've got 125 credits and I only need 50, and I can sell them to somebody who really needs some credits, right? Right?
Not yet.
Like how you said, yeah. Okay.
Something might be able to work out, especially if you're looking at something like a large campus. You might be able to use credits from, there may be some way to look at bigger campuses where one building, where it might share at that point. I don't know yet whether that's physically possible. Okay. So back to the list. Some notes we wanted to make for you was item 2. You'll find on your list of summaries, it's on roof replacement insulation. Personal experience, this has been an ongoing battle for well over a decade on how to deal when you're doing a roof recover and exposing insulation. And there are times where the roof cannot handle the increase in insulation to meet the latest code. And it might actually flood into, the insulation may be higher than the door that opens up into the roof. They've come up with good language to work out how to show that you might make up for that reduction in insulation in one area and work it out with other parts of the roof, or where it's just not physically possible, how to deal with that. When you're dealing with existing buildings, no two roofs are going to be alike, where the roof drains, scuppers, roof hatches, doors, curbs, and equipment. You will deal with your work through an approval process with your local building official to allow this to happen. It's good language they brought into 90.1. Thermal bridging, item number 3. This is addressing relatively more complex language. We've always had, for several code cycles, I think since 2011, they've talked about thermal bridging, and where a piece of steel or concrete may be extending through the wall insulation. they've come up with some where there is significant amount of thermal bridging ways to address that and come up with calculations to show or do other work to address thermal bridging when you say may have a lot of concrete balconies that go through and you can't, or where you don't have the ability to break or have continuous insulation, say up the exterior of a wall, or where it parapet details and other details. It's where you have significant amounts, they now have better ways to show calculations and what the actual U factor is. Item 4, off hours control. This is a minor one, but it's dealing with the trigger for when HVAC systems, such as, really for residential spaces, small systems need a programmable thermostat. It's dropping from 15,000 BTUs to a 7,000 BTU point. Stairs and elevator shafts, just a little more clarification about vent openings. That's the language was poorly noted and spread around too much. They've kind of combined it to get into one place in the code now. Item number 6 is garage ventilation. They have new language about having separate ventilation systems or control of separate ventilation systems when the garage is, say, divided up. There's, very little opening between floors, and separating that out, that when you have sort of individual areas, that those need their own control sections. It's no law, and that also the trigger for requiring ventilation is for when the ventilation system has a fan horsepower of over 5 horsepower. It's no longer based upon the floor area. 5 horsepower for a basic garage will put you probably in the 20 to 25,000 square foot range for needing the ventilation controls. In other words, nitrogen, carbon monoxide, NOx sensors to control.
That says separate exhaust systems and controls.
So if you have, this would make it that if you had, say, a garage where you had 24,000 square feet on one floor and you had really just a portal to go between the two floors, that second floor would need a separate set of controls, and the trigger would be on each section.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
hotel guest room controls. There was a thing, what we would call a card key capture system. You've probably seen some hotels that have this, where you put your card in and it tells the system that you're there. That method is becoming obsolete. Most hotel chains are moving to different methods, and card key capture systems are no longer used for essentially hotel motel control operation. Personally was in one where they had a permanent card that they left in your card key system to make sure it continued to work all the time. So moving to systems that truly are looking whether or not there is a guest in the room and pre-warming up of the room. On fan power efficiency, item number 8, this is really bringing in what's been in residential code and other model codes for small ventilation fans. It's really bringing in what is an Energy Star fan efficiency specification for small fans. And of course, Oregon Department of Energy is here. We now have an appliance standard that really is setting that for fans anyway, sold in the state. So that's a fairly easy one to deal with. Item number 9 on the efficiency tables. If you're aware of the big list of efficiency for different HVAC equipment and water heaters and the like, lots of new tables, but they're making it so it will cover different types of equipment. It'll avoid confusion on certain types, such as for their dedicated outdoor air units, which are very different in operation and efficiency dedication from what would be a standard package rooftop unit. New tables, all of these tables are tied to federal rulemaking. Really, manufacturers have been involved in this from day one, so they know in advance that they're going to need to be making equipment to these minimum efficiencies regardless, for within the United States at least. So a few changes, but also some additional tables to make it easier and for you to submit on equipment that we would get regular questions. Which table do I use for a dedicated outside air unit? And now that's being resolved. On pipe insulation, item number, oh, well, I've got them flipped to 10 and 11 for 7.4.3. The table for plumbing piping insulation is now in the plumbing section versus heating and cooling water piping and refrigerant piping under Chapter 6 or Section 6. Moving on to the tables 9.5.1 and 9.6.1 for lighting power allowance. As usual, with the improving LED lighting efficiencies, they have further reduced the requirements. They found that people can meet this, so they've dropped the required levels once again. And the interesting part about this is it can possibly save on installation costs, because you can use fewer fixtures to do the same amount of work. That's their analysis. On simplified building compliance paths, the lighting power allowances in the simplified building path have been aligned with the new tables 9.5.1 and 9.6.1. Daylight control is 9.4.1.1. The trigger for daylight zones and when you need them is now when there is 75 watts of connected fixtures in the zone versus 150 watts. That's in the primary zone, and then 150 watts versus 300 watts in the secondary zone. Those levels were reduced. We did a quick look at how much lighting that would be, and going back to the lighting you were power you were allowed back under our 2014 code, it's pretty much aligning with what was in the code once upon a time, just because moving from fluorescent to LED lighting, it's about the same triggers that we had back in 2014. The next one is horticultural lighting. And this is not for ag exempt structures, but if someone is providing horticultural lighting in regulated structures, there is a requirement for the efficiency of the bulbs that are used. And it's pretty much becoming industry standard for these bulbs, because it does save significant energy to use them, but it is only for regulated buildings. Are there any questions on what was in the base code? And then we can move on to the OEESC document.
I see no hands.
So on the new document, again, we strike the scope and up from 90.1, because we have to use our language, we're bringing the scope and coverage from, to make it align with the Oregon Structural Specialty Code. This is effectively Chapter 13, lucky us, of the Structural Code. 90.1 changed their scope to be buildings and their sites. Of course, we're regulating only the buildings that are regulated under the Structural Code. We've updated under E102.1 to have this apply to the buildings and items that are fed from the site. You may have a cooling tower or a ground mounted air cooled chiller that's not on the building, but it is regulated. You may have, and we've regulated parking lot lighting or other site lighting that is actually fed or served from the buildings. This is just to maintain our current scope and standard for sites. So a standalone ball field, unless it has a regulated structure on it, is not covered under the structural code. Under alterations, we're maintaining our current interpretation of what you must alter to meet current code. We're having to deal with the lighting language, which is a little, was pretty unclear on the scope and was looking to the point where if you even changed one light in a room, you would have to go beyond the scope of that and actually rewire an entire room or series of spaces potentially. Just maintaining that sort of, you touch it, you broke it, you bought it, setting a scope of where work is, the alterations that must meet current code. We did an update on historic buildings to sort of align with where our code had been. The current 90.1 language on historic buildings left it to where if you had a building in a historic district, you could completely gut it and not have to meet the energy code, even though the historic listing had nothing to do with the interior of the building. So we've had a clarification to align with old language that dates back to when we would use the word chapeau and others to look at efficiency. This is a requirement so that the exception is for systems or portions of the building that are critical to the historic designation. So if, the windows are part of the designation, you don't require them to update the windows. That is an exception in the code. On data centers and the use of standard 90.4, this is the 90.1 definition. For data centers, we have changed the definition of what a data center is to any computer room or series of computer rooms with a connected load greater than 100 kilowatts. This is increased from the basic of 10 kW. This better aligns with where the cooling would be. It's something that would probably require at least, so a computer room with over 20 tons of cooling would probably need to be in the 90.4 path. It's still optional for small computer rooms under 10 kW to use the 90.4 path, but larger than 100 kilowatts of connected load, you do need to use the 90.4 path. Under ventilation standards, there are a lot of references to standards 62.1 and 62.2, which are commercial and residential ventilation standards in standard 90.1. We made a major sort of a general coverall that when there's a reference to that, it also means mechanical code, because some of our mechanical code requirements may be different from what's in 62.1 and 62.2. One of them that is addressed is in section E301.3.c in the revised document. It has to do with occupied ventilation standby control. This is one area where the the International Mechanical Code, Oregon Mechanical Code differ from 62.1. And if you're using 62.1, you can set the ventilation to 0, but not when you're using the Oregon Mechanical Code. So that's under a different ventilation path. Under non-transient dwelling unit exhaust ventilation recovery, this is an area where at standard 90.1, they are trying to work on fixes on this, and I am personally involved with helping rewrite this because they're coming up with enforceable standards for the efficiency of the ventilating units. They're redefining to make sure that this is tied to the outdoor air and not just an exhaust ventilation system. On the 90.1 committee, they are addressing with new questions of, well, which exhaust stream are they having to deal with? We looked at a fix for this code cycle to really address dealing with energy recovery ventilation unit triggers for individual dwelling units versus where you may have a central system, and the language intends to look at how to have a cost-effective methodology, which was in the other than non-transient dwelling unit ventilation recovery. It's to get a better alignment with that, but also still have a sort of starting point cost-effective trigger for dealing with non-transient dwelling unit exhaust ventilation recovery systems. Help make that clearer. Item E301.3F is about door switches. There was a new requirement that all openings to the exterior, if they didn't have an automatic closer, needed to have a special switch tied into the HVAC system to make it stop. This is, we have one modification here. 90.1 doesn't deal with low-rise dwelling units under the authority of the RMSB. And this is one area where we're looking to not require this for low-rise dwelling units because they have a lot of, just the plain entry door into these units. They normally don't have an automatic closer on them, and it's excluding that low-rise outdoor entry apartment or residential building from this requirement. And it also adds an additional piece, which was the division felt was necessary, an exception for doors not used as a building entry where approved by the building official. There can be some doors that, and one that we've had lots of questions about in the house, whether in-house, whether or not they required a vestibule, something like their doors you'll find on a car dealership. They're big double doors that are normally locked. Those, adding a special switch to show, oh, you left those open to shut off the HVAC. That's something that a designer could go to ask for approval from the building official. So there will always be an unusual door that may not need this interlock with the HVAC system. Moving on to voltage drop, E301.4B. We're noting that this voltage drop requirement is not adopted in the state. This is truly under the regulation of the National Electric Code and the Oregon Electrical Specialty Code. This is one area where model code and division statutory authorities break apart. And this is something that, if the electrical board wishes to work on it, that is their authority to do so. We had, moving on to controlled receptacle compliance option, we had an alternate path for requirement of controlled receptacles. There was one of three options. Now that we have additional credits, if you wish to, we've changed this to if you wish to provide 5 additional energy efficiency credits under Section 11, you can do this instead. And this replaces the previous 3 alternative compliance paths. So makes it a little easier, gives you more paths to provide an exception to controlled receptacles, which are for certain spaces and certain building types. The additional efficiency, moving on to electrical energy monitoring, and also this will apply to fuel monitoring. In the efficiency table credits, they have an average about 2 credits are assigned for buildings that aren't required to have monitoring, get 2 credits for it. So we are going to make under this is that if your building is required to have electrical energy monitoring, you may select as an exception to do 2 additional efficiency credits. It's sort of, they have come up with a value for it. This is something that gives an option, since there is an additional path for it, instead of making it a mandatory. So do additional credits, you can avoid the energy monitoring, the splitting of electrical. There's a new requirement for compressed air systems, and these are, and it was for compressed air systems in factory occupancies. Compressed air systems are the sole authority of the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code and their board. We're not adopting this. We found that, first off, some of the things we couldn't require. Some of the items that 90.1 address are actually less efficient than what is in 90.1. So this is a plug load, unregulated load that is regulated under the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code. We'll leave that to them to see if they wish to add any additional efficiency requirements under their board and their statutory authority. The last item is one of the bigger ones, and it has to do with your adjusted report. The 90.1 has added a requirement for a minimum of 0.5 watts per square foot of renewable energy on buildings. I believe the trigger was 10,000 square feet, with some exceptions. We do not have the ability to make a mandatory requirement for renewable energy on buildings, and we don't have a system structure set up for those buildings that can't install on buildings. So sections 10.5.1 and 10.5.2 aren't adopted. With that, the efficiency tables that we have reviewed earlier, that 50 points, if a building can't install renewable energy on the building, and renewable energy is one of the affordable paths. So when PNNL and the ASHRAE committee went through and created the tables, they made sure that there was a path that was cost effective and at least one path that did not involve preempted equipment. Okay, going for requiring equipment that had higher efficiency for HVAC equipment, which would present an adoption problem for any state. So under 90.1 in section 11.5.1, there's an adjustment. If you can't put in renewables, if you do not have the ability to put in renewables, it cut out a cost-effective path, and at the same time threw you into needing to essentially have to do violate some preemption rules. What has happened here is we're just pre-adjusting the required tables, a new efficiency table that you'll see in your packet. Need to bring that up. You'll see a revised. I'm trying to scroll down. You'll forgive me.
Almost all the way at the bottom.
Yes.
Second to last page.
My thumb is on the scroll button is just getting a blister.
Page 35.
Yeah. So that is the new revised table. It's a simplified one, so you can see the requirements with the adjustment to take out the renewables. Those are the targets that will be used in the state of Oregon for additional measures. So those are the credit points that you'll be required to get in climate zones 4C and 5B for the different building types. And then we also adjusted for section R0. The very last page is section R01, on-site renewable energy. We've made the adjustment that if you do wish to gain points for it, we changed the calculation version just to change the RR required. Essentially, once you exceed 0.5 watts per square foot, you can then start gaining credits as an additional measure. So if you wish to get credit points and wish to use section R01, on-site renewable energy, we just adjusted the formulas to get rid of references to sections that we have not adopted. And with that, that is the 2023-2024 or Oregon Energy Efficiency Specialty Code.
Does anybody have any questions before we move to a motion to adopt and recommend to the administrator of Mark?
Chair Hansen, this is Matt Lutter. I've got a quick question. Does the 2024 OEESC apply to low-rise residential or not?
Thank you. Through the chair, Mark Heizer with division. Yes, it applies to the change in scope is to all buildings constructed under the Oregon Structural Specialty Code. So that would include low-rise apartments. Any R occupancy 3 stories and under would still be in this. If a building is constructed to the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, so Book A, use Chapter 11 of the Residential Code. If you're constructing to the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, these energy provisions apply regardless. If you're in this book, they apply.
Thank you.
Tom.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. This is Tom Young, Northwest Concrete Masonry Association. Through the chair, I had a question for Mr. Heizer. Mark, hello, Mark. I had a question on the table 1151-1, the energy credit table that you've talked about. Appreciate your explanation of it in the changes to the 90.1. I'm just a little confused on the state version here of that table. So the changes that have been made, the adjustments that have been made in this document we're looking at today, were they solely based on that renewable energy issue you just talked about, or was there some other rationale behind those adjusted numbers?
Through the chair, Mark Heizer with the division, it is based solely on the renewable. There is a separate, in 90.1, there is a table 11.5.1-2, which is the adjustment for on-site renewable. It's a separate table, and we just use those figures straight from that table. So as if it applies to all structures in the building. So there were no other adjustments to the numbers here. And the original document sent out would have required you to go in and manually do the adjustment. We're just saving time and doing it straight in this table for everyone.
Sounds like a good thing. All right. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it does. Any other questions for Mark? Okay. Seeing none. Does anybody want to make a motion about adopting this for referral to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption?
I'll make that motion, Gary Heikkinen. So a motion to approve the proposed code language and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
Excellent. Can we have a second, please?
Thomas Kyle, I'll second.
Thank you very much. Debbie, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. For the record, may I say that John Chmelir has left the meeting. So without his vote, we are okay with the quorum.
Thank you.
So Matthew
Tom, do you have another question, or do you need to put your hand down, or do you have a question? Okay, go ahead, Debbie. I'm sorry.
Matthew Lutter.
Approve.
Walter Cottle.
Aye.
Blake Schlide,
Yes.
Gary Heikkinen,
Aye.
Brian Richards,
Aye.
Vice Chair Thomas Kyle,
Aye.
and Chair Jay Hansen.
Aye. Chair Jay Hansen votes aye.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
That's all the new business we have, folks. That being said, I'm going to call this meeting concluded and adjourned at 10:52 on the 17th of October, 2023. I very much appreciate all of your attention and participation on this board, and I look forward to seeing you on February 7th, if I remember that correctly.
Or 6, but who's keeping track?
February 6th. So have an excellent end to your year if I don't see you before then, and go Ducks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Hansen.
Thank